It's 2:30, so I guess to be mindful to everybody's time, both those coming off the previous ones and the ones going to different classes following this. We'll get started promptly at 2:30 with this with the shiur. Welcome in, everybody. Hope you're having a nice afternoon. And thank you so much for joining us for this shiur on Mitzvat Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvah of living in the land of Israel in preparation for Yom Haasmaut. Before we start, I'd just like to thank the SCA for putting together such a beautiful program and giving us a platform to be able to educate all the members of our community on various topics and ideas related to the land of Eretz Yisrael, in memory of Mr. Stanley Chera A, who was such a big proponent of the land of Israel, supported it, taught the community members to support it as well, and he will be dearly missed. But days like today will certainly continue his legacy for many, many years to come. So in this shiur, we're going to try and mix a little bit of halacha and musar and perspective on the land of Eretz Yisrael. We're going to take a look at a number of different statements of our rabbis about the importance and significance of living in the land of Eretz Yisrael, how that affects halacha, why were some people, or still we have people today who are against living in the land of Eretz Yisrael, and where that happened. Why was it that only in the 20th century people moved to Eretz Yisrael and Zionism became popular, when for many hundreds of years there was opportunity there, but rabbis told their students to stay in Europe, to stay where the yeshivot were, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We'll also talk about some exemptions, which people need to live in Eretz Yisrael, when can you leave Eretz Yisrael, and for those of us, which is I think the majority who don't live in Eretz Yisrael, is visiting Eretz Yisrael considered a part and parcel of this mitzvah as well? We'll try to tackle all of those questions and possibly more during this half hour. Obviously, there's so much that one can discuss about living in the land of Eretz Yisrael, and so many different statements that one could pick from our rabbis, because it was such a key and critical component of Jewish life. But we'll try to narrow it down to try to give us a good scope of what it is that our rabbis are telling us. So we'll begin with the significance of Eretz Yisrael in Chazal, in the words of our rabbis. I've chosen two statements to show you, both of which come from the Rambam in his Laws of Kings, Perek He. The two halachot are halacha Yud and halacha Yud Aleph. So I'll read here just from the English to save us a little bit of time with translation. The sages commented, whoever dwells in Eretz Yisrael will have his sins forgiven. As is mentioned in Yeshaya, the inhabitant shall not say, I am sick. The one who inhabits Israel shall not say, I am sick. The people who dwell there shall be forgiven for their sins. Even one who walks 4 cubits there will merit the world to come, and one who is buried there receives atonement, as if the place in which he is buried is an altar of atonement. As it states, his land will atone for his people. This is from Shirat Ha'azino, V'chiper admato amo, that the land itself has the capacity to atone for a person's sins even after he has departed from this world. And this is the source for why so many people are adamant and make it a priority to purchase burial plots in the land of Eretz Yisrael in order to be buried there. We often take people from all different reaches of the earth to be buried in the land of Eretz Yisrael, and it's very coveted and desired for people to be buried there, is based on Harambam's words over here in this halacha. In contrast, the prophet Amos used the expression, you shall die in an impure land, as a prophecy of retribution. One of the punishments that Amos mentions for Jewish people who don't follow the Torah is that they'll die and be buried outside the land of Eretz Yisrael, which shows you how coveted it is to be buried in the land, and to be buried outside the land is considered retribution and a consequence. There is no comparison between the merit of a person who lives in Eretz Yisrael and ultimately is buried there, and one whose body is brought there after his death. Nevertheless, great sages would bring their dead there. Take an example from our patriarch Jacob and Joseph the righteous. So we see that even in the Torah, people like Yaakov and Yosef made it a priority, and often made their descendants swear that they would bring them to the land of Eretz Yisrael and bury them there, even if they could not be there physically to live out the rest of their days. Now, for those people who are not buried in Eretz Yisrael, many times we find that rabbis specifically did not want to be buried in Eretz Yisrael, more because they wanted to stay closer to their communities, especially many hachamim who wanted their legacies to move on, and their disciples and students wanted to be able to pray by their grave sites. They remained outside the land of Eretz Yisrael so that they could be close to their communities, and their communities could look to them for inspiration rather than be shipped off to the land of Eretz Yisrael. So there is potentially some reason why a person may not want to be buried in the land of Eretz Yisrael, be separate from their spouses, etc., etc. But for the most part, being buried in Eretz Yisrael is a big zechut, as illustrated here from the Rambam. And just dwelling in Eretz Yisrael is already something that gives a person atonement for his sins and merits him in the world to come. On a similar plane, we see the rabbis continue in the next halacha here. The Rambam quotes again another statement of tradition from our Hachamim regarding living in the land of Israel. At all times, a person should dwell in Eretz Yisrael, even in a city whose population is primarily Gentile, even if it means having to live mostly amongst non-Jews. One should still live in the land of Eretz Yisrael, rather than dwell in the diaspora, even in a city whose population is primarily Jewish. This is very surprising because the Hachamim would normally want a person to be in a proper environment, but the power and pull of Eretz Yisrael was so great for the Hachamim that even if it meant living amongst non-Jews, it was more appropriate to live in Eretz Yisrael in the eyes of the rabbis than to live outside of Eretz Yisrael in a primarily Jewish community. So while we have many strong Jewish communities like our own, living in Eretz Yisrael, living outside of Eretz Yisrael, I should say, to say, well, I want to be around my community and my community is the most important thing to me, and I think the rabbis would want that as an excuse potentially for not going to Eretz Yisrael, does not seem to be a valid excuse based on the Rambam's point, because even if one has to abandon their old Jewish community to live in Israel, they seem to be commanded to do so in order to be able to live in Eretz Yisrael. However, there were many Hasidic rabbis, one of them, the Avnei Nezer, Rabbi Avraham Borenstein, who qualified this statement. He wanted to say that this is only assuming that a person, by living in the land of Eretz Yisrael around non-Jews, could still achieve a very high connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. After all, in his mind, the whole point of living in Eretz Yisrael is to create a very close connection with Hashem. If a person does not trust himself, if he's not strong enough to live amongst non-Jews in Eretz Yisrael, and that will cause him to leave the path of Judaism, Torah, and mitzvot, and halacha, he considered it even worse to move to Eretz Yisrael in such a situation. Because then he said, a person will end up living in Eretz Yisrael and desecrating the land. He'll come to do all sorts of sins and transgressions, and instead of sanctifying himself in the land, he will do the opposite. And so really he looked at it as, yes, the rabbis were emphasizing living in the land of Israel, assuming that a person could be observant of Torah and mitzvot. But if it meant living amongst goyim in a situation where a person could not be observant of Torah and mitzvot, then Rabbi Avraham Borenstein said that Rambam is not speaking about such a situation. So that is also another consideration that many Hasidic rabbis, many of the people who lived in Europe with all their yeshivot and strong communities, used to say, we're not going to move to a desolate land of Eretz Yisrael where no structure is set up, and potentially live amongst the goyim where we will end up abandoning Torah and mitzvot. This was their logic, or one of their logics, to justify not living in Eretz Yisrael. This applies because, I'm continuing to read in the Rambam, he says, this applies because whoever leaves Eretz Yisrael for the diaspora is considered as if he worships idols. Very strong words by the rabbis. As mentioned in Shemuel states, they have driven me out today from dwelling in the heritage of God, saying, go serve other gods. This is talking about David HaMelech, who had to abandon the land of Eretz Yisrael and considered it as if he now was completely abandoning God and serving idols. Similarly, Yechezkel's prophecies of retribution state, they shall not come to the land of Israel. In the eyes of the Hachamim, leaving Eretz Yisrael, or as the Gemara also says, living outside of Eretz Yisrael, is tantamount to not having a God, Kemisha en lo Eloah, and is equivalent to worshiping idols. This is very, very harsh words by our Hachamim, which, as we continue through, we'll try to give a little bit more context and understanding as to how the Hachamim could say that one who lives outside of the land of Israel, it's as if he worships idols. How could that be? We're here, we have Batei Knesiyot, Batei Midrashot, schools, shuls, synagogues, places of study. There's a tremendous Torah presence. How could a person say living outside of Eretz Yisrael is like a person is worshiping idols but does not have a God? I'm sure many people have already a thought as to how we can answer that. As we continue to move forward, we will see a little bit more that could potentially give us a clue into what the rabbis were talking about. So these are two statements from the Rambam which exalt the land of Eretz Israel and show how committed we must be to living in the land of Eretz Israel as opposed to living outside of Israel. Now, lest we think that this is just very nice ideas and just a concept, there are many halachic ramifications. This concept, the significance of living in Israel, actually affects and impacts Jewish law. I'm going to give you two examples of this. The first one comes from a beraita in Masechet Ketubot, Daf Kuf Yud Amud Bet. I hope my wife is not on this one because she's not going to like this source. If you're sitting next to your wife, they may not like this source. Dad, is mom next to you? Oh boy. Okay, she's next to us. All right. Here we go. The sages taught, right? The Hachamim said, if the husband says that he wishes to ascend, the husband wants to go live in Israel, and his wife says that she does not wish to ascend, she doesn't want to live in Israel, one forces her to ascend. She is obligated to follow her husband to the land of Israel. Now, don't think that just means because the wife has to follow the husband. We will see in the next halakha, the reverse happens. It's actually the pull of Eretz Israel that is forcing the wife to follow her husband. And if she will not, she is divorced without receiving her marriage contract. The husband has the right to divorce his wife on the grounds that she does not wish to move to Eretz Israel, and because she refuses to move, she loses the rights to her ketubah, to her marriage contract. That is how strong the pull is of Eretz Israel. If she says to ascend, and he says that he does not wish to ascend, one forces him to ascend. And if he does not wish to immigrate, he must divorce her and give her the marriage contract. On the flip side, if she wants to move to Eretz Israel and he does not want to move to Eretz Israel, then he has to follow her to go and live in Israel. And if he does not want to, doesn't want to go, he must divorce her. She can force him to give her a get and give her the marriage contract so that she can move to Eretz Israel. This is how strong the pull of living in Eretz Israel is and how much it is considered a mitzvah, that if either party desires so much to live in Eretz Israel, they could force the other out of the marriage and with a financial penalty against them. In the second halacha, it's basically the same thing, just in a situation where the couple lives in Eretz Israel and now is debating whether to leave Eretz Israel. So the first case was they want to go to Eretz Israel. The second case is exactly the same, just if they were living in Eretz Israel and now the husband or wife says, we need to leave, we need to go ahead and get out. Now, the rabbis here are not trying to create rifts between husband and wife. This is obviously something we want husbands and wives to speak about. Where they're going to live is of top priority. But the rabbis here are illustrating how important it is for a couple to make the decision together to go ahead and live in Eretz Israel, and how important it is to consider living in Eretz Israel when starting a life together and starting a family together as well. The next halacha, which could be affected by the significance of Eretz Israel, comes from a Gemara in Masechet Gitin Daf Het Amud Bet. The Gemara says as follows: the Baraita teaches, and one who purchases a field in Syria is like one who purchases a field in the outskirts of Yerushalayim. Syria was some of the extra boundaries that David HaMelech increased to the land of Eretz Israel, and there's always a debate how to view those lands. Are they completely part of Eretz Israel and its sanctity? Because the borders and the boundaries of Eretz Israel were expanded by David HaMelech, or are they looked at as annexed pieces which don't have the Kedusha of Eretz Israel? Says the Beraita, a person who purchases land in Syria, this expanded boundary to the land of Israel, it's as if he purchased it right outside of the city of Yerushalayim. With regard to which halacha was this stated, what difference does it make? Rav Sheshat says, this serves to say that one writes a bill of sale for this purchase, and one may write a bill of sale even on Shabbat. In other words, if the person has an opportunity to purchase a home or land in the land of Israel, and it's Shabbat, obviously he's purchasing it from a non-Jew, he has the right to write the bill of sale, write the sale contract on Shabbat, even though writing is a melacha, it's an isur deoraita. He has the ability to write that contract on Shabbat in order to conduct the sale on Shabbat. Now the Gemara is puzzled by this. Can it enter your mind that one may write the bill of sale on Shabbat? How could you violate a Torah law for purchasing a piece of Eretz Israel? So the Gemara qualifies based on Rava. As Rava says, one tells a Gentile and he does so. Here too, one tells a Gentile and he does so. And even though telling a Gentile violates a rabbinic decree, the sages did not impose this decree due to the mitzvah of settling Eretz Yisrael. So another ramification of the importance of living and owning land in Eretz Yisrael is that we're even allowed to tell a goy, which is normally something which is forbidden to do. We're allowed to tell a goy to write a sale contract of a home or a piece of land on Shabbat in order to be able to purchase that land on Shabbat. Now, why don't you just say, well, just wait till Sunday? It's a couple of hours. How hard could it be? We're worried that potentially the non-Jew will change his mind, and you will lose out on an opportunity to purchase a portion in the land of Eretz Yisrael, which is so vital to the Hachamim that even waiting a few hours was not something that they encouraged the person to do, and they gave license to the person to tell the goy to write the contract to purchase the home or the land in Eretz Yisrael. So far we've seen that Eretz Yisrael is quite significant in the eyes of the Hachamim, not just in theory, but also in practice as well. Question is, anytime we're analyzing a mitzvah, we have to ask ourselves the question, is this mitzvah a mitzvah deoraita from the Torah, or is it a mitzvah derabbanan? Is this a rabbinic mitzvah? We just saw that the rabbis waived their decree of amira legoy, of telling a non-Jew to do something on Shabbat, which is a rabbinic decree. They waived it in the face of the mitzvah of inhabiting the land of Eretz Yisrael. Which could mean that they waived one dirabanan in the face of another, but more likely it's that they waived one dirabanan their dirabanan in the face of a deoraita. So we already have potential proof that this mitzvah is a Torah commandment. But what is the source? That's the next question. So the Ramban, Nachmanides, in his commentary to the Rambam, Maimonides, in his disagreements with him in the book of Mitzvot, he writes the following story to prove that the mitzvah of living in Israel is a biblical commandment. A story is told of Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua and Rabbi Yohanan the sandal maker, who were journeying to Nitzivim, that's a place outside of Eretz Yisrael, to study Torah with Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. When they reached the Sidon, they remembered the land of Israel. They lifted their eyes and tears streamed down. They ripped their clothes and read the following verse: "You shall conquer them and live in their land," talking about conquering the Canaanite nations and living in the land of Eretz Canaan, later to be referred to as Eretz Yisrael. Immediately they turned and went back home. They said, dwelling in the land of Israel is equivalent to all the laws in the Torah. So here you have a story of two sages who are leaving Eretz Yisrael to study Torah. Now keep that in the back of your mind, because we will see later that one of the exemptions to be able to leave Eretz Yisrael or not live in Eretz Yisrael is the desire to study Torah. If a person thinks that they can study Torah better, or their rabbi is living outside of Eretz Yisrael, they have the license to live outside of Eretz Yisrael in order to study Torah in a more proper fashion. And so these two rabbis were doing that. They were leaving Eretz Yisrael to study Torah, which means that they had the license to leave, and yet they could not bear the thought of leaving the holiness of the land of Eretz Yisrael. They cried tears and ripped their clothes for even thinking about it, and then they immediately turned back home to live in Eretz Yisrael, saying that there's no amount of Torah that they could study and no amount of mitzvot they could perform outside the land of Eretz Yisrael, which is tantamount to living in the land of Israel, equivalent to all the laws of the Torah. The pasuk that's quoted over here, V'yarashta otam, you will inherit them, V'yashavta be'artzam, and you will dwell in their land, referring to Eretz Yisrael, is the Ramban's source from the Torah for the biblical commandment of living in Eretz Yisrael. Before we wrap this one up, it's important to note that the Rambam, Maimonides, who's always the key halachic decider in our minds, did not count the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael among the 613 mitzvot, which he enumerated in his book, Sefer HaMitzvot, which is where you would expect it to be. Several commentaries attempt to try and make sense of this glaring absence from the Rambam's work. There's three of them, the Sdei Hamed, Mabit, and Megillat Esther. That's a commentary on the Rambam. They each take a different approach. The Sdei Hamed writes that the Rambam considers living in Israel as a rabbinic command in our day, which is why he didn't count it amongst the 613 mitzvot, because Rambam does not count biblical commandments. The biblical verse which commanded living in Israel are intended only for that generation which left Eretz Mitzrayim and went to the land, as part of the mitzvah to conquer the land of Israel. The mitzvah of conquering the land of Israel is only temporary mitzvah for that generation, and thus is not counted among the 613 mitzvot. So Sdei Hamed feels that it's biblical, but the reason why the Rambam didn't count it is because the actual conquering, sorry, I apologize, Sdei Hamed says it's rabbinic, that's why it wasn't counted, and the mitzvah of conquering, which was at the time when they left Egypt, that's only a temporary mitzvah which doesn't get counted for all generations. That's the Sdei Hamed's approach to the Rambam. The Mabit, on the other hand, says that the Rambam does consider living in Israel a biblical commandment, like the Ramban, and in accordance with the halachot we saw at the beginning of the presentation. However, since this command is a general one, which is a prerequisite to fulfilling the mitzvot that are connected to the land of Israel, such as Shemitah and tithing and Tirumot and Ma'asrot, the Rambam did not count it as a separate mitzvah in the count of the 613 mitzvot. In other words, the living in Eretz Yisrael is a prerequisite to other mitzvot, which those other mitzvot he counts as mitzvot, and therefore it's on its own, living in Israel is not a mitzvah, but you need it in order to fulfill all these other mitzvot which he counted. So in essence, it is a biblical commandment, it just doesn't get counted technically as its own specific mitzvah. The last approach, which is the most interesting one and perhaps lays the groundwork for some of the anti-Israel sentiment, is Megillat Esther, a commentary on the Rambam by Isaac de Leon of Toledo, Spain. The Rambam, he says, did not believe that living in Israel is a mitzvah in his day or during the time of Galut, but rather a mitzvah which existed temporarily in the days of Moshe, Yehoshua, and David, and will exist again in the times of Mashiach. However, since it is not a mitzvah for all time, it is not counted in the 613 mitzvot. And this starts the process of potentially a group of thinkers who said that while we are in exile, which the question really is, how do we define that and how do we balance that, which is beyond the scope of this class, but they said while we're in exile, there's no mitzvah to live in the land of Eretz Yisrael. And as I'll mention later, some people even said that forcibly going to the land of Eretz Yisrael was a violation of rabbinic law. So different approaches as to how to balance the Rambam's omission of the land of the mitzvah of living in Israel not being there in the Sefer HaMitzvot. Okay, the next part is, what do we gain by living in Israel? Why is living in Israel so important? So yes, it atones for our sins. Yes, there's all this significance, but from a practical standpoint, what is it that we want to achieve by living in the land of Eretz Yisrael? So there are two basic approaches by the rabbis to this question. The first comes from a Gemara in Masechet Sotah, Daf Yud Daled Amud Aleph. Rabbi Simlai taught, for what reason did Moshe, our teacher, greatly desire to enter Eretz Yisrael, but he was unable to? Did he need to eat of its produce, or did he need to satisfy himself from its goodness? This is not Moshe Rabbeinu's intention to fulfill his physical desires. Rather, this is what Moshe said. Many mitzvot were commanded to the Jewish people, and some of them could be fulfilled only in Eretz Yisrael. So I will enter the land in order that they can all be fulfilled by me. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to him, do you seek to enter the land to perform these mitzvot for any reason other than you receive a reward? I will ascribe you credit as if you had performed them. We see that Moshe Rabbeinu's burning desire to enter the land of Eretz Yisrael stems from his desire to fulfill all of the commandments of the Torah, including those which are unique to the land of Eretz Yisrael and cannot be performed anywhere else in the world. This is, in Moshe's view, the major reason why you want to live in Eretz Yisrael, to be able to fulfill every one of God's commandments and connect to God in every which way that He has given us the ability to do so. However, there was another approach which said, irregardless of the mitzvot that a person could perform, because in fact there are some places in Eretz Yisrael which there's a question mark if they're required to fulfill the mitzvot hatluyot ba'aretz, the mitzvot that are dependent on the land of Israel. We saw those lands in Syria that were expanded. Some of those, say the rabbis, have kiddushat haaretz, they have sanctity, but there isn't a connection to necessarily those mitzvot that need to be performed. Those mitzvot are not required in those areas. So they noticed that some areas have a sanctity of Eretz Yisrael, but are not required to fulfill the mitzvot of Eretz Yisrael per se, which led them to believe that that isn't the only connection between why a person wants to live in Eretz Yisrael and the mitzvot, the performance of the mitzvot. And so they looked to a more metaphysical idea presented here in the Gemara of Masechet Ta'anit, Daf Yud Amud Bet. The sages taught in a Braita, Eretz Yisrael was created first, and the rest of the entire world was created afterward. As it is stated, while as yet he had not made the land nor the fields. Land here refers to Eretz Yisrael, the land, and the fields, almost an extension of that, was the rest of the world. And so land is first, the rest of the world second. Furthermore, Eretz Yisrael is watered by the Holy One. God rains down precipitation directly on Eretz Yisrael, blessed be he himself, and the rest of the entire world is watered through an intermediary, as it is stated, who gives rain upon the land and sends water upon the fields. You see, God gives rain upon the land, that's the land of Israel, but he sends, with an emissary, water upon the fields to the rest of the world. In other words, through the metaphor of rain, the Gemara is saying that people who live in Eretz Yisrael have a stronger divine providence. They experience the intensity of God's Shekhinah in a stronger way than anywhere else on earth. God interacts with the inhabitants of the land of Israel in a unique way that cannot be achieved if a person lived anywhere else in the world. Nothing exemplifies this more than the fact that in general, no prophet was able to receive nivu'ah unless they lived in the land of Israel. God would not communicate directly with a human being unless he lived in the land of Eretz Yisrael. And so, regardless of the mitzvot that a person could fulfill in the land of Israel, there was a secondary approach that says that I just want to live in Israel to be able to experience that strong connection that Hashem has with those who live in the land of Israel. This is why, as I mentioned before, the Avnei Nezer said if people are going to live in Eretz Yisrael and not abide by the mitzvot and desecrate the land, they won't experience this divine providence and they should not go to Israel. Let's talk in the last few minutes that we have about some potential exemptions and details of this mitzvah. So, can a person leave Eretz Yisrael if they are living in the land? Says the Rambam, it is forbidden to leave Eretz Yisrael ever, except for purposes of learning Torah or marrying or to save his money from the non-Jews. Very extenuating circumstances. Torah and getting married. The rabbis here debate, is it limited only to those two mitzvot or could it be other mitzvot as well? Then he must return to the land. Harambam says, despite leaving the land for the purposes of a mitzvah, such as learning Torah or getting married, he must have plans to return to the land of Israel. One may leave for commerce. However, one may not reside outside the land of Israel, outside the land, unless there is famine so severe that wheat which one cost 1 dinar now costs 2 dinarim. This rule applies when people have money and the fruit is expensive. However, if fruit is cheap, but people have no money or income, and he doesn't even have a cent in his pocket, one may go to wherever he can to make a living. Although it may be permissible to leave the country, it would not be altruistic to do so. For we see that Mahlon and Kilion, two of the greats of their generation, left only because of the considerable troubles there were then, and nevertheless perished. So we see a couple of things from this Rambam. Harambam allows certain considerations to allow a person to leave Eretz Yisrael and by extension, not live in Eretz Yisrael in the first place. If a person feels like their Torah study is better outside the land, or if a person cannot make a proper living in Eretz Yisrael, or if a person wants to get married and he cannot find a suitable mate in Eretz Yisrael, these are all reasons that a person may leave Eretz Yisrael or not go there in the first place. But a person must always have in mind the idea that they wish to return to the land. To dwell in Eretz Yisrael, outside of Eretz Yisrael permanently, is only permitted in a situation of famine. And even still, Harambam tells us that people should ideally remain in Eretz Yisrael, even under these conditions, as we see from Mahlon and Kilion, the two sons of Elimelech, who left in Megillat Rut and perished because they went to Moab instead of bearing the situation in Eretz Yisrael of famine and supporting the people whom he was able to support because they were very wealthy. So this does offer us some comfort for us who live outside of Eretz Yisrael. Many of us will use the justification that we cannot earn a proper living in the land of Israel, although this has to also be looked at from an honest perspective. What kind of living are we thinking about? Perhaps we're not able to earn the same kind of living in Israel that we are accustomed to here in our Syrian community of Brooklyn or Deal, but we can earn a decent living that is worth living, but maybe not with the same luxuries and luxuries that we would be accustomed to. Is that a genuine concern? It doesn't sound like it. In other words, if I have to give up a 4-bedroom home for a 3-bedroom home in Israel, but I could live in a 3-bedroom home, sounds like that's not an example which we can use this justification of parnasa. Torah and getting married has been a big one, and is usable according to the Rambam. So here are some justifications that the Rambam gives for leaving or not living in Eretz Yisrael. I like to just close with 2 points. The first is visiting Eretz Yisrael. So for those of us who do not live in Eretz Yisrael for the various reasons, and class is not meant to be a guilt trip on anybody. I myself don't live in Eretz Yisrael, so I'm in everybody else's boat. But over here we have an interesting mahloket. Well, not mahloket. We have an interesting halacha here in Shulchan Aruch. I will summarize it because we're running short on time. Shulchan Aruch discusses a person who wants to go on a caravan journey, and the caravan is leaving on Friday, which means if he travels with the caravan, he will likely have to travel on Shabbat and desecrate the Shabbat. In general, he's not allowed to do this. However, if the caravan is going to Israel and he wishes to live in Eretz Yisrael, he may do so. He may join the caravan on Friday, attempt to get them to stop, but if they don't and they continue journeying, he's allowed to journey on Shabbat because of Pikuach Nefesh, even though in the first place he kind of knew he was causing himself to do that, all in order to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Now the question is this for a person who's going to live in Eretz Yisrael? What if the person is only going to visit in Eretz Yisrael? So you could see the Magen Avraham over here, Rabbi Avraham Gombiner. He writes, one who is ascending to Israel, this is specific to one who intends to live there permanently. In his first opinion, the Magen Avraham says, this leniency is only afforded if a person is going to live there. However, he writes, others, however, explain that even with the intent to return is permissible, since even walking 4 cubits in Israel is a mitzvah. As we mentioned before, just walking and breathing the air and seeing the land of Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah in and of itself. And therefore, if a person is visiting Eretz Yisrael, he is fulfilling an aspect of the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael by simply walking the land, spending their money and supporting it, and being there present to visit in the land. So that's sort of the ending over here. Wait, I had another point. Okay, the slide's not working. So I just wanted to close by saying, if living in Eretz Yisrael is such a big mitzvah, why is it so difficult? Why is it so challenging? There's my mitzvah. So in the closing remarks here, we see a Gemara in Masechet Berachot. The Gemara in Masechet Berachot discusses a very interesting statement of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, the Holy One, blessed be He, gave Israel 3 precious gifts. That's the nation of Israel, all of which were given only by means of suffering. It purified Israel so that they may merit to receive them. These gifts are Torah, Eretz Yisrael, and the world to come. According to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Eretz Yisrael was given to us, but only with suffering. Eretz Yisrael, as it is written, as a man rebukes his son, so the Lord, your God, rebukes you. And it is written thereafter, for the Lord your God will bring you to a good land. Hashem, like a father or a parent, rebukes their child because he wants what's best for them, many times rebukes us as well. And when we heed God's words, we get the precious gift at the end of it of Eretz Yisrael. Nothing worthwhile comes easily. And therefore, while living in Eretz Yisrael is certainly a huge challenge financially, going away from family, community, it is something that all of us should think about or contemplate. And even though it's hard, it's difficult, it is not an easy lifestyle, nothing that is worthwhile in this world comes easily. It is something that a person has to work at, and sometimes comes with a little bit of difficulty and hardship. But the reward, in the end of the day, is tremendous and it is great. So we didn't touch on everything here. We didn't get to why there are so many people who are anti-living in Eretz Yisrael. We're kind of out of time. And I didn't put it in the PowerPoint presentation just for that purpose, but we kind of touched on it a little bit with the Megillat Esther. We discussed the significance of Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, that visiting Eretz Yisrael and supporting it is a mitzvah as well. Some of the exemptions and reasons why we don't live in Eretz Yisrael and trying to contextualize that in our lives. And finally, the fact that living in Eretz Yisrael, while difficult, is something that is worthwhile and will gain us tremendous reward in the world, both in this world as well as in the world to come. I hope you enjoyed that class. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to share. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a great day. Awesome.